6-year-old Ethan Parker was playing alone in the dusty garden behind his family's modest home in the southern district of the city. It was an ordinary evening, too ordinary to be remembered. The air carried the scent of damp soil and fallen leaves. Somewhere nearby, a radio played softly through an open kitchen window. Inside, his mother Eleanor Parker was preparing dinner, unaware that the next few minutes would divide her life into a before and an after. Ethan climbed onto the low stone rim of an old decorative well, an object that had been in the garden long before the family moved in. The stones were worn smooth by decades of weather. One misplaced step was enough. He slipped. There was no scream, only a dull, hollow sound as his head struck the edge of the stone basin. Elena heard it instantly, not because it was loud, but because it was wrong. She rushed outside and found her son lying motionless on the ground, eyes half open, lips pale. His small body was unnaturally still. She dropped to her knees, calling his name again and again. Ethan did not respond. According to emergency records later filed at St. Isar Medical Center, the child remained unconscious for approximately 118 seconds, 2 minutes, an interval that physicians would later describe as medically insignificant, an interval that would prove to be anything but. At the hospital, doctors ran standard neurological examinations. Pupils reacted normally. No internal bleeding, no fractures. The diagnosis was brief and reassuring. A mild concussion. No long-term effects expected. Ethan was discharged before midnight. But that same night, something shifted. At 2:11 a.m., Elena was awakened by a voice coming from her son's bedroom. Not crying, not frightened. Calm. Too calm. She entered the room and saw Ethan sitting upright in bed, eyes open, staring at nothing. He spoke without hesitation. "Mum, I saw Yeshua when he was a child, just like me." Elena froze. The name didn't belong in her home. It was not spoken in their household. It was not taught to a 6-year-old who could barely read. Yet Ethan continued, his voice steady, precise. He lived in a place of sand and stone. He made birds from living matter, and they flew. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. In that moment, she understood something instinctively, something no medical report could explain. Her son had not imagined this, and whatever had awakened inside him was not finished speaking. Wednesday morning, October 14th, 1987, 6:28 a.m. Sleep never truly returned to the Parker household that night. Elena sat at the kitchen table as dawn crept through the windows, untouched coffee growing cold in her hands. Across from her sat Michael Parker, Ethan's father, still wearing yesterday's shirt, his jaw clenched in disbelief. Between them, the silence was heavier than any argument. Ethan emerged from his bedroom just after sunrise. He looked normal. Too normal. He rubbed his eyes, asked for cereal, complained about the cold milk. No headache, no dizziness, no confusion. Michael studied him closely. "Ethan," he said carefully, "do you remember what you said last night?" The boy paused. "Yes." "What do you remember?" Ethan sat down, spoon resting in the bowl, and looked up at his parents with an intensity that made Michael shift uncomfortably in his chair. "I remember seeing him," Ethan said. "Not dreaming. Seeing." Michael took a breath. "Where did you hear that name?" he asked. "Yeshua." Ethan shook his head. "I didn't hear it." Elena's fingers tightened around the mug. "Then how do you know it?" she whispered. Ethan frowned slightly, as if the question itself confused him. "Because that's what they called him," he replied. "That's what his mother said when she was worried. That's what the men whispered when they were afraid." Michael stood up abruptly and began pacing the kitchen. They were practicing Catholics. Faith had structure in their home, tradition, order. Stories were told as they had always been told. But that name, the Aramaic form of Jesus, had never crossed their lips. Michael stopped pacing. "You're saying you were there," he said. "With him?" Ethan nodded. "I was watching," he said. "And sometimes I was him." The sentence landed like a physical blow. Elena felt her stomach twist. "Ethan," she said gently, forcing calm into her voice, "did someone show you a movie? A book? Did you hear this at school?" The boy looked genuinely puzzled. "No," he said. "I can't read yet." That was true. At school, Ethan struggled with letters. At home, the only religious text was a single, unopened Bible kept on a high shelf. There was no source, no exposure, no explanation. That afternoon, Elena walked to the neighborhood mobile library, a weekly service parked near the local market. She asked the librarian a question she already feared the answer to. "Is Yeshua another name for Jesus?" The librarian nodded without hesitation. "Yes, it's the original Aramaic name." Elena's hands trembled as she left. That evening, as Ethan prepared for bed, he spoke again, unprompted. "Tomorrow," he said softly, "I'll tell you what they didn't want remembered." Then he lay down, turned to the wall, and fell asleep within seconds. For the next 3 days. He said nothing more, and yet both parents felt it. Something had opened, and it was waiting. Friday evening, October 16th, 1987, 8:19 p.m. For 3 days, Ethan said nothing. No visions, no strange names, no midnight awakenings. By Friday evening, Elena and Michael had almost convinced themselves that the incident had passed, that the words spoken after the concussion had been nothing more than a fleeting neurological after-effect. They were eating dinner in the kitchen when it happened. Ethan's spoon slipped from his hand and clattered against the plate. He did not react. His eyes were fixed on the far wall, unfocused, as though something invisible had stepped between him and the room. "Elena," Michael whispered. "Look at him." Ethan's lips began to move, silently. Seconds passed. Then, without shifting his gaze, he spoke. Yeshua was 6 years old when he made a bird from living matter and let it fly. The room seemed to constrict. Michael stopped chewing. Elena felt her heart beat in her ears. "His teacher saw it," Ethan continued, voice firm and deliberate. "And he was afraid." Michael swallowed. "Who was his teacher, Ethan?" The boy blinked, once, as if surfacing from deep water. "Hillel," he said. "An old man with a white beard. He taught him the sacred texts in a stone room with a dirt floor." Elena's breath caught. The description was too precise, too textured. It did not sound like imagination. It sounded like memory. "Hillel told him never to do it again," Ethan said. "He said power like that would bring punishment. He said people would fear him." Michael stood up slowly. "Hillel? From Nazareth?" he asked cautiously. Ethan nodded. "He was afraid of what the elders would say." Silence filled the kitchen. Michael made a decision he had been resisting since Tuesday night. They needed guidance, not from doctors, from the church. The next morning, Michael contacted Father Gabriel Moretti, the parish priest of their local diocese. A measured man in his late 60s, known for his theological background and calm demeanor, Father Gabriel agreed to visit the Parker home. He arrived Sunday afternoon. Ethan sat across from him in the living room, legs dangling off the couch, hands folded in his lap. He did not appear nervous. Father Gabriel leaned forward slightly. "Ethan," he said gently, "tell me what you've been seeing." The boy met his eyes without fear. "I've seen things that were written down," Ethan replied. in books that people decided not to read anymore. Father Gabriel felt a tightening in his chest. "What kinds of books?" he asked. "The ones that talk about what he could do as a child," Ethan said. "The ones they said were dangerous." The priest masked his reaction, but only barely, because what Ethan was describing aligned with texts Father Gabriel had encountered decades earlier during his seminary studies. Texts the church did not teach. Texts that were never meant to be spoken aloud. And in that moment, Father Gabriel understood something unsettling. This was not a child retelling stories. This was a child uncovering something that had been buried. Sunday afternoon, October 18th, 1987, 4:03 p.m. Father Gabriel remained seated long after Ethan finished speaking. The living room felt smaller now, as though the air itself had thickened. Elena watched the priest carefully. In all the years she had known him, she had never seen uncertainty settle so visibly across his face. "This isn't something to take lightly," Father Gabriel finally said. "Not spiritually, and not medically." Michael nodded. "That's what we're afraid of." Within 48 hours, Father Gabriel contacted the diocesan office. The report was careful, neutral, almost clinical. A child, post-head injury, demonstrating advanced religious knowledge inconsistent with age, education, or exposure. The church's response was swift but discreet. On Wednesday morning, October 21st, 1987, a second visitor arrived at the Parker home. Dr. Evelyn Carter, senior child neuropsychologist, contracted by the diocese for cases involving unusual cognitive presentations. She was not there to validate miracles. She was there to rule out pathology. Ethan sat across from her at the dining table, a box of wooden building blocks between them. Dr. Carter observed silently as he stacked and restacked the pieces with absent-minded precision. She began with standard questions. "What's your favorite color? Do you know what year it is? Can you count backward from 20? Ethan answered flawlessly. Then she shifted. "Ethan," she said, "have you been having dreams?" "No," he replied. "Dreams feel different." "How so?" "They don't stay," he said. "This does." Dr. Carter made a note. She tested memory recall, attention span, emotional response. Nothing indicated dissociation, no signs of fantasy fixation, no markers for post-traumatic confabulation. Finally, she asked the question she had been avoiding. "Can you tell me more about the man you mentioned before?" "Yeshua." Ethan hesitated, then spoke. "He was punished for things he didn't understand yet," he said quietly. "They said he made people uncomfortable." Dr. Carter felt a chill run through her spine. That evening, she met privately with Father Gabriel. "I don't see a disorder," she admitted. "If anything, his cognition is unusually integrated for his age. Emotional coherence, temporal awareness. He's not inventing." Father Gabriel exhaled slowly. "Then what is he doing?" Dr. Carter hesitated. "I don't have a category for it." 2 days later, the diocese escalated the matter. A formal request was submitted to Bishop Adrian Beaumont, a theologian specializing in early Christian manuscripts and historical doctrine. On Saturday, October 24th, 1987, the bishop arrived in Munich. He was 72 years old, calm, impeccably composed, and deeply unsettled. After listening to the recordings, reviewing Dr. Carter's notes, and reading Father Gabriel's account, Bishop Beaumont asked a single question. "Has the child explained why these stories were removed?" Ethan looked up at him. "Yes," he said. "But not yet." The bishop leaned forward. "Why not?" Ethan met his gaze. "Because you won't like the answer." In that moment, Bishop Beaumont understood. This was no longer about belief. It was about history and the cost of hiding it. Tuesday morning, October 27th, 1987, 10:14 a.m. Bishop Adrian Beaumont returned 3 days later carrying a weathered leather briefcase. Inside were documents few people outside specialized academic circles had ever seen. Photographic reproductions of manuscripts written in Latin and Koine Greek, fragments preserved in controlled archives, texts excluded from the canonical Gospels, studied, catalogued, and then quietly set aside. The bishop placed the briefcase on the coffee table and sat across from Ethan. "I'm going to show you something," he said carefully. "I want you to tell me if any of this feels familiar." He removed a single photograph, an archaeological image taken in 1952 showing the ruins of first-century Nazareth, stone dwellings, a communal well, and the foundation of an early synagogue. Ethan stared at the image in silence. 30 seconds passed. Then he pointed. "His house was there," he said, indicating a section near the edge of the frame. Bishop Beaumont leaned forward. "How can you tell?" Ethan frowned slightly. "Because something is missing." The bishop felt his pulse quicken. "What's missing?" Ethan traced a small circle in the air with his finger. "There was an olive tree," he said. "Very old. He climbed it at sunset to watch the light change." Dr. Evelyn Carter exchanged a glance with Father Gabriel. No canonical or apocryphal text mentioned such a tree. "What was under it?" the bishop asked quietly. Ethan closed his eyes. "A wooden box," he said. "Small. Buried. His mother kept it hidden." Bishop Beaumont sat back slowly. "What was in the box?" "Drawings," Ethan replied. "Birds, his family, and the things he did when no one was watching." The room was silent. This detail did not exist in any manuscript. It was not speculation. It was new. Bishop Beaumont opened another folder. "This one," he said, "describes a story where a child fell into water and walked back out unharmed. Do you recognize it?" Ethan nodded. "He was pushed," he said. "They laughed. Then they screamed." The bishop's voice tightened. "Do you know where this story appears?" "No," Ethan said. "But I know it was written down later." Dr. Carter's hands trembled as she wrote. The bishop closed the briefcase. "That's enough for today," he said. But inside, his certainty had already fractured. That night, he contacted colleagues at the University of Munich, Department of Biblical Studies. Quiet inquiries, hypothetical questions, every detail Ethan had described aligned with obscure, non-canonical texts, except the ones that didn't. Those were the most troubling, because they suggested something no scholar could accept lightly, that the child was not recalling texts, he was recalling events. Before leaving, Bishop Beaumont asked Ethan one final question. "Do you know why these stories were never included?" Ethan looked at him steadily. "Yes." "Why?" "Because they showed that power didn't wait for permission," Ethan said, "and that frightened people who believed they owned it." The bishop felt a chill settle into his bones. As he stepped outside into the cold Munich air, one thought repeated in his mind. If this was true, then history itself had been edited. Thursday morning, October 29th, 1987, 9:06 a.m. The decision was made quietly. No formal decree, no written authorization, only a shared understanding among those present that whatever Ethan had uncovered could not be ignored, and could not yet be revealed. Bishop Adrian Beaumont convened a private meeting in his Munich residence with Father Gabriel Moretti and Dr. Evelyn Carter. The conclusion was unanimous. They needed to follow the child. That same afternoon, Ethan spoke again. without being asked. "There's no need to go to Nazareth," he said, sitting cross-legged on the living room floor. "What you're looking for is closer." Bishop Beaumont looked up sharply. "Closer to where?" Ethan pointed toward the window, where the distant outline of forested hills cut against the pale sky. "There's a place in the Bavarian highlands," he said. "A village most people forgot. A monk brought something there long ago. He hid it before he died." Elena felt her stomach drop. "What did he bring, Ethan?" The boy's voice softened. "Proof." The bishop leaned forward. "What is the name of this village?" Ethan did not answer immediately, his brow furrowed, as if accessing something buried deep. "St. Oswald's Parish," he said finally, "near the forest, near the old paths." That evening, Bishop Beaumont consulted archival maps. St. Oswald's Parish existed, but barely. A near-abandoned settlement deep within the Bavarian forest region, omitted from most modern atlases, its population reduced to fewer than 24 residents. The local church had been deconsecrated decades earlier due to structural instability. It was, by every measure, insignificant. 2 weeks later, a small convoy departed Munich before dawn. No press, no official markings. Only 5 people: Bishop Beaumont, Father Gabriel, Dr. Carter, Elena, and Ethan. Michael Parker remained behind, unable to leave work, watching silently as the car disappeared down the street. He would later describe the moment as the first time he felt he might never fully understand what his son was becoming. The drive took nearly 4 hours. As they approached the village, the paved road gave way to gravel. Dense forest pressed in on both sides, blocking out the sky. Ethan sat quietly in the back seat, staring out the window. 20 kilometers from their destination, he spoke. "When you arrive," he said calmly, "find the old church, the one no one uses." Bishop Beaumont glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "And then? There's a stone behind the altar," Ethan continued. "It's loose. Under it is a passage." Dr. Carter felt a tightening in her chest. "A passage to where, Ethan?" The boy closed his eyes. "To the truth." They reached St. Oswald's Parish just after noon. The village was eerily still. An elderly man sweeping the front of his house paused to watch them arrive. When Father Gabriel asked about the old church, the man pointed uphill. "No one's been inside for 30 years, he said. "People say it's not right." The group exchanged glances. They climbed the hill in silence, and as the abandoned church came into view, Ethan stepped ahead of them. As if he already knew the way, the doors of the old church resisted at first. Swollen by decades of moisture, the wood groaned as Father Gabriel and Bishop Beaumont pushed together. With a final strained creak, the doors gave way, releasing a breath of cold, stale air that smelled of stone, dust, and abandonment. Inside, time had collapsed. Broken pews lay scattered like fallen ribs. Faded statues watched from the shadows, their chipped faces stripped of expression. At the far end stood a simple stone altar, thick with dust and spiderwebs. Ethan did not hesitate. He walked straight down the center aisle. "Elena," Dr. Carter whispered, "has he ever been here before?" Elena shook her head, unable to speak. Ethan knelt in front of the altar and placed his small hand on a rectangular stone slab embedded in the floor. "This one," he said. Bishop Beaumont signaled to Father Gabriel, who retrieved an iron pry bar from the vehicle. Together, they worked the edge of the stone. It resisted, then shifted. With a deep, grinding sound, the slab lifted. Beneath it was darkness. The bishop switched on a flashlight and aimed it downward. Stone steps descended into the earth. "How deep?" Dr. Carter asked. "About 3 meters," Bishop Beaumont replied, his voice tight. Ethan leaned forward, peering into the opening. "I'll go first," he said. Elena grabbed his arm instinctively. "No." Before she could protest further, Bishop Beaumont placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "He knows where he's going," he said quietly. "More than any of us." Reluctantly, Elena let go. Ethan descended the steps slowly, one hand trailing along the stone wall. The others followed, the air growing cooler with each step. At the bottom lay a small chamber, roughly 4 meters square, its walls carved directly into volcanic rock. Symbols were etched into the stone, crude yet deliberate. Bishop Beaumont raised the flashlight. "Aramaic," he whispered, "and Latin. This shouldn't exist here." At the center of the chamber stood a stone table. On it rested a wooden chest, darkened by age, its surface scarred and cracked, but unmistakably intact. Ethan approached it and placed both hands on the lid. "This is why they were afraid," he said softly. Bishop Beaumont felt his knees weaken. "Open it," Father Gabriel whispered. Ethan shook his head. "You should," he said, stepping aside. With trembling hands, the bishop lifted the lid. Inside lay 3 objects: a copper cylinder, sealed tight, a small clay figure shaped like a dove, and a folded piece of cloth stained dark with age. Dr. Carter inhaled sharply. "What is this?" she whispered. Father Gabriel lifted the cylinder with reverence. "A manuscript container," he said. "First-century design." Ethan looked up at them. "These stories weren't removed because they were false," he said. "They were removed because they showed that he was human before he was declared divine." The flashlight beam trembled in Bishop Beaumont's hand. If this was authentic, if even part of it was, then the foundations of history were no longer stable, and far above them, in the abandoned church, the doors stood open to a truth that had waited centuries to be found. The copper cylinder was heavier than it looked. Father Gabriel carried it with both hands as they climbed back to the surface, as if afraid the slightest imbalance might fracture whatever fragile history lay sealed inside. No one spoke. Even Ethan was silent now, his expression distant, almost relieved, like someone who had finally reached a long-remembered place. They set the cylinder on the altar. Bishop Adrian Beaumont put on thin archival gloves from his briefcase. His movements were precise, practiced, but his breathing was not. He hesitated for a moment, then carefully twisted the seal. It opened with a soft, metallic sigh. Inside was a tightly rolled manuscript, wrapped in linen, that crumbled at the edges when exposed to air. "First-century papyrus," the bishop murmured, "preserved in copper. Extraordinary." Father Gabriel slowly unrolled the text just enough to reveal the opening lines. The ink was faded but legible, written in Galilean Aramaic. Dr. Evelyn Carter leaned closer, her professional detachment finally giving way to awe. "Can you read it?" she asked. Father Gabriel swallowed. "Fragments," he said. Enough to understand the voice. His eyes widened as he traced the first lines. "This is not a gospel," he said quietly. "It's a testimony." Bishop Beaumont felt his chest tighten. "A testimony by whom?" Father Gabriel pointed to the lower margin, where a name, barely visible, had been inscribed with deliberate care. "Miriam of Magdala." Silence descended on the ruined church. Dr. Carter's voice trembled. "Mary Magdalene?" Father Gabriel nodded. "It's written in the first person," he said. "She claims direct witness." Ethan stepped forward. "She wrote it so someone would find it," he said. "Not then. Later." Bishop Beaumont closed his eyes briefly. Mary Magdalene was mentioned in the canonical Gospels, but never as a chronicler, never as a witness to Jesus' childhood. Father Gabriel read aloud, translating as he went. I testify to what I saw with my own eyes. When Jeshua was a child, the power of the Most High already moved through him. Dr. Carter felt a chill spread across her skin. This wasn't theology. It was observation. The text described a boy who healed animals, who multiplied food when his family had none, who calmed storms not with prayer, but with command. Then Father Gabriel stopped. "There's more," he said. "Something they would never allow." He continued reading. "When a child drowned in the river, Jeshua placed his hands upon him, and life returned. The elders accused him of sorcery. His parents fled in fear." Bishop Beaumont sat down heavily on a broken pew. This account predated all known canonical narratives, and it contradicted one of the Church's oldest assumptions, that Jesus' power emerged only in adulthood. Ethan looked at the manuscript. "That's why they hid it," he said softly, "because it showed he didn't wait for authority." No one argued. Outside, the forest wind pressed against the church walls, and inside, a truth long denied had finally found its voice. Within 72 hours, the manuscript was transported under discreet security to the University of Munich, Department of Ancient Languages and Biblical Studies. No press release, no announcement. Only a small circle of scholars was informed. Carbon-14 testing was conducted immediately. The results were conclusive. 60 to 80 CE, exactly within the lifetime of Mary of Magdala. Dr. Lucas Reinhardt, Emeritus Professor of Paleography, examined the handwriting. "This is consistent with a female Aramaic hand of the 1st century, he said on record. "The linguistic structure is informal, personal, not liturgical. In other words, it wasn't written to persuade. It was written to remember." As translations progressed, patterns emerged. The manuscript referenced events found nowhere else, yet aligned perfectly with cultural, geographic, and historical context. No anachronisms, no theological agenda, only fear. Fear of how people reacted when a child displayed divine authority. Bishop Beaumont realized the implications immediately. "If this is true," he said during a closed meeting, "then the early church didn't merely select texts. They curated reality." Ethan listened from the corner of the room, legs swinging gently. "This is only one," he said. Everyone turned. "One what?" Dr. Carter asked. "One manuscript," Ethan replied. "There are 6 more." The room went still. "Where?" Father Gabriel asked. Ethan named them calmly. Ethiopia, Turkey, Spain, Egypt, India, France. Each location corresponded to known, but sealed, repositories of early Christian materials. Bishop Beaumont felt something close to dread. "And the last?" he asked. Ethan hesitated. "The last never left Jerusalem," he said. "It was sealed before the temple fell." A text written by Jeshua himself. Silence returned, this time absolute. History had not ended. It had been paused. The call from Rome arrived sooner than expected. Less than 48 hours after the preliminary authentication report was circulated within academic channels, Bishop Adrian Beaumont received a secure line request marked "Urgent, Holy See." The voice on the other end was calm, measured, too calm. "Bishop Beaumont," the man said, "this is Cardinal Jonathan Hale, Prefect for Historical Doctrine and Special Archives. We are aware of your discovery." Beaumont closed his eyes. Information like this did not travel quickly by accident. "We would like to speak with the child," the Cardinal continued, "in person." 3 days later, a Vatican aircraft touched down at Munich International Airport under diplomatic clearance. Cardinal Hale was 68, sharp-eyed, and known within the Curia as a man who understood secrets not as burdens, but as tools. He arrived with a single briefcase and no entourage. The meeting took place in a private chamber of the archdiocese. Ethan sat beside his parents, legs dangling from a chair too large for him. The cardinal observed him in silence for nearly a full minute. "You are very young to be causing this much concern," Hale said at last. Ethan looked up. "I didn't cause it," he replied. "I remembered it." The cardinal's lips tightened almost imperceptibly. "I have read the translation," Hale said, "and the carbon data. If this manuscript is authentic, and it appears to be, it will force us to revisit decisions made over 16 centuries ago." He leaned forward. "Do you know why those decisions were made?" "Yes," Ethan said. "Tell me." "Because the church was afraid of chaos," Ethan replied. "Afraid of people realizing they didn't need permission to touch God." The room fell silent. Cardinal Hale straightened. "You understand," he said carefully, "that releasing such information could destabilize faith worldwide." Ethan nodded. "Yes. And yet you think it should be known?" "Yes." The cardinal exhaled slowly. "Then we have a problem." He opened his briefcase and removed several documents, stamped with seals few outside the Vatican ever saw. "We have known for centuries that fragments existed," Hale admitted. "References, mentions, rumors of suppressed childhood accounts." He looked directly at Ethan. "But we never knew where they were." Ethan met his gaze. "I do." The cardinal paused. "How many?" 7, Ethan said. "This was the first." "And the most important?" "The last," Ethan replied, "because it was written by Jeshua himself." Cardinal Hale felt something shift behind his ribs. "A diary?" he asked quietly. "Yes." "Written when he was 12, after the temple." The cardinal closed the briefcase. "This cannot be handled publicly," he said. "Not yet." Bishop Beaumont spoke for the first time. "With respect, Eminence, it already is." Cardinal Hale turned to him slowly. "Then God help us," he said, "because history has just restarted. Within days, a covert task group was formed. Officially, it did not exist. Unofficially, it consisted of Vatican archivists, international archaeologists, linguists, and one child who seemed to know more than all of them combined. Ethan was asked to speak freely. No recordings, no notes in the room. Only afterward would summaries be reconstructed from memory. He described each location with unsettling precision. "In Lalibela, Ethiopia," he said, "beneath a rock-hewn church. Not the main altar, the smaller one, behind the third pillar." Cardinal Hale glanced at a map. "That matches an undocumented substructure," he murmured. "In Cappadocia, Turkey," Ethan continued, "inside a sealed bronze vessel, hidden in a cave once used by monks who fled persecution." Again, alignment. "In Montserrat, Spain," Ethan said, "behind the Black Madonna. The wall opens if you press the stone where the candle wax never melts." No one spoke. "In St. Catherine's Monastery, Sinai," he went on. "The librarians know it exists, but not what it is." "And India?" Dr. Carter asked softly. Ethan smiled faintly. "Kerala," he said. "A private Syriac collection, guarded by families, not priests." Finally, France. "The catacombs beneath Saint-Denis," Ethan said. "Sealed after the plague." Cardinal Hale put his pen down. "And Jerusalem," he said. "The 7th?" Ethan's expression changed. "That one is different," he said. "It was meant to sleep." "Where?" the cardinal asked. "Under the western wall," Ethan replied, "in a chamber sealed in the year 70. Silence. "That would mean," Bishop Beaumont began. "That it has not been touched," Ethan finished, "by anyone." The cardinal leaned back, visibly shaken. "A text written by Jesus himself," he whispered. "Untouched for nearly 2 millennia." "Yes," Ethan said, "because it explains everything." "What?" Hale asked. "Why his childhood mattered," Ethan said, "and why it was hidden." The task group understood then. They were no longer chasing artifacts. They were racing time. The operation in Jerusalem was to be carried out at night. This was not a choice, but a necessity. During the day, the city was overly lively. Not only people, but also eyes were roaming the streets. Cameras, patrols, invisible observers. Nothing in Jerusalem was ever truly alone. The latest data from the underground radar broke the silence. Directly beneath the western wall, there was an unnatural void. Not a hole, not a collapse. It was orderly. It was deliberate. And most importantly, it was exactly where Ethan had pointed out months ago. The coordinates were measured again and again. The margin of error was limited to centimeters. This wasn't a guess. This felt like remembering. When Ethan first approached the west wall, the rest of the group had taken a few more steps. Then they noticed. Ethan had stopped. It was as if he had hit an invisible line. His hand didn't reach for the stones. He pulled back. His eyes filled. Then tears streamed down. "He was 12, he whispered. His voice was almost lost in the wind. "Here." He understood who he was. Elena said nothing. She just held her son. The only thing connecting him to that moment was his mother's warmth. "How do you feel?" she finally asked, her voice trembling. Ethan paused. It wasn't a question a child should have to think about. But he had the answer ready. Responsibility. That word fell like a heavy stone into the night. 3 weeks later, the underground room was opened. The excavation was not rushed. Every centimeter, every layer was recorded, because everyone knew. What would be found here might be something that shouldn't be found. There was only one object in the center of the room. It was covered in wax, sealed with clay, a cylinder made to pass through time, protected. In the laboratory, the seal was slowly opened. No one tried not to hold their breath. Everyone was already holding it. The parchment inside was undamaged. The ink was still dark. The fibers were intact. The writing was clear. Early Aramaic. Lead archaeologist Dr. Ben Cohen took the text, his hands trembling slightly. He scanned the lines with his eyes. Then he began to read aloud. "I, Jeshua ben Joseph, am writing this at the age of 12. The room froze. No one moved. No one took notes. No one looked at the camera. As the text progressed, the words weren't just being read. They carried weight. I saw fear in the eyes of those in power. They do not fear God. They fear freedom. A chair creaked. Someone swallowed. Ethan stepped forward. This time, no one stopped him. "This," he said in a clear voice, "is the part they won't allow." The translation continued. "I did not come to be worshipped. I came to be imitated." At that moment, everyone in the room felt the same thing. This was no longer a matter of faith. This was a matter of order. Cardinal Hale bowed his head. His shoulders shook. He made no attempt to hide his tears, because the text was finished. But its meaning was just beginning. The Vatican did not rush. It waited. For 3 full months, silence ruled behind the thick stone walls. No leaks, no statements, no denials. Only sealed rooms and locked corridors. Behind closed doors, teams worked in isolation. Linguists dissected every line, syntax, idiom, regional variants. They searched for anachronisms and found none. Chemists analyzed ink composition, binding agents, organic residues. The formulas matched nothing modern. Independent laboratories, separated by continents and ideology, replicated carbon dating results again and again. Every conceivable challenge was anticipated. Forgery theories, contamination arguments, later interpolation claims. Each one was tested. Each one collapsed. By the end of the third month, there were no internal objections left to raise. Only one decision remained: silence or truth. When the announcement finally came, it was not whispered in corridors. It was not leaked to select journalists. It was not softened. It was broadcast. On April 2nd, 1988, at exactly 11 a.m. Central European Time, the Holy See convened an unprecedented global press conference. Satellite feeds connected Rome to every major network on Earth. The room was packed, journalists standing shoulder to shoulder, translators frozen in their booths, cameras already rolling before a single word had been spoken. Cardinal Jonathan Hale stood beside the Pope, holding a single thin folder. Its simplicity was unsettling. No seals, no markings, just paper. The Pope stepped forward. For centuries, he began, his voice calm but unyielding, the Church acted from fear. Fear of disorder, fear of misunderstanding, fear of losing control. He paused. Today, he said, that fear ends. The words did not echo. They struck. He continued without raising his voice. We announce the discovery and authentication of 7 early manuscripts documenting the childhood and youth of Jesus of Nazareth. A murmur spread across the room. Then, one of them, the Pope said, was written by Jesus himself. The world froze. News outlets cut away from scheduled programming. Markets halted mid-session as uncertainty rippled through global systems. Phones rang in temples, mosques, churches, synagogues, then went unanswered. Religious leaders of every tradition watched in stunned silence. Some crossed themselves. Some bowed their heads. Some simply stared. Within hours, the manuscripts were released digitally. Not summarized, not interpreted, not framed, unedited, unfiltered, high-resolution scans, full linguistic transcriptions, laboratory reports attached line by line. The response was immediate and explosive. Crowds gathered in city squares. Universities cancelled lectures to host emergency forums. Governments issued carefully worded statements that said nothing at all. Some hailed it as spiritual liberation. A long-buried voice finally heard. Others denounced it as heresy, a dangerous fracture in sacred order. But across belief systems, across borders, across centuries of doctrine, one truth remained unavoidable. No one could deny the evidence. And once seen, it could not be unseen. Universities convened emergency symposia within days. Lecture halls filled beyond capacity. Corridors became debate chambers. Centuries-old assumptions were pulled into the open, not by students, but by the professors themselves. Scholars who had spent entire careers defending rigid theological frameworks now stood before microphones, visibly unsettled. Some spoke cautiously. Others abandoned prepared notes altogether. A few admitted, publicly for the first time, that the manuscripts forced them to reconsider foundations they had never imagined questioning. Not because the texts weakened Jesus, because they did not. They humanized him. The manuscripts revealed a boy who hesitated before speaking, who learned through failure, who feared consequences, not punishment, but harm to others. A boy who felt anger, restraint, doubt, and still chose compassion. Not perfection, choice. That distinction alone destabilized centuries of interpretation. Most unsettling of all was the message repeated throughout the texts. Not once, not metaphorically, but plainly. The divine does not belong to institutions. It appeared in different phrasings, different contexts, but always the same meaning. Authority does not confer holiness. Ritual does not guarantee truth. Presence does not require permission. Grassroots movements emerged almost overnight, not organized by councils, not sanctioned by hierarchies. They spread through word of mouth, through shared readings, through quiet gatherings in homes, parks, unused sanctuaries. Church attendance did not collapse. It transformed. People still gathered, but not to be instructed, not to be corrected, not to be managed. They gathered to practice, to serve meals without cameras, to sit in silence without direction, to listen without response. In some parishes, meditation replaced confession, not absolution, but awareness. In others, community healing replaced sermons, stories shared in circles, hands held, grief acknowledged without explanation. Faith stopped being something received. It became something done, active, present, embodied. And for the first time in generations, belief was no longer measured by adherence, but by action. Ethan Parker did not attend the press conference. That decision was not strategic. It was parental. At his parents' insistence, he returned to school in Munich as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Same classroom, same desk, same routine. Teachers were instructed to treat him like any other child. Classmates were told nothing. For a few hours each day, the world allowed Ethan to be ordinary again. Outside the school gates, it was anything but. Media outlets pleaded for interviews. Networks offered exclusive contracts. Governments requested private meetings under the language of historical clarification. All were refused. No statements, no appearances, no follow-up explanations. The silence became its own message. Only one interview was granted. No studio, no audience, no editing room, a single journalist, a single camera, a single question. They sat across from each other in a quiet room with plain white walls. No symbols, no banners, no context cues. The journalist did not preface the question, did not dramatize it. He simply asked, "What do you want people to understand?" Ethan did not answer immediately. He looked into the camera, not past it, not around it. Into it. "Jeshua didn't come to be different from us," he said. "He came to show us what we can become." There was no emphasis, no flourish, no attempt to persuade, just certainty. The clip was released without promotion. Within hours it crossed borders. Within days it crossed cultures. Within weeks it crossed belief systems. It was viewed over 1 billion times. But more important than the number was the silence that followed each viewing. Because for many, it was the first time faith felt less like distance and more like possibility. 6 months later, the remaining manuscripts were recovered. They were not found in a single place, nor in a single moment. Each emerged through separate excavations, sealed collections, forgotten compartments, as if time itself had been waiting for permission. Yet when studied side by side, their message was unmistakable. Each confirmed the same theme. Not once, not symbolically, but consistently. Power without ego, authority without domination, divinity expressed through humility. There were no calls for obedience, no commands for reverence, no claim of separation between the sacred and the human. The texts did not elevate one figure above humanity. They lowered divinity into reach. Within the Vatican, change could no longer be delayed. What began as internal review evolved into structural reform. Not cosmetic, not rhetorical. Committees were dissolved. Long-standing doctrinal boards, once closed, insulated, unquestioned, were replaced with interfaith councils. Historians sat beside theologians, philosophers beside sociologists. Voices once excluded were invited, not as observers, but as equals. For the first time in its history, the apostolic archives were partially opened. Catalogues once accessible only by title were released in full. Restrictions were eased, redactions lifted. Scholars entered rooms that had been sealed for generations. The announcement was brief, carefully worded, irreversible. The age of secrecy was ending, and with it, the unspoken assumption that truth required protection from the very people seeking it. One afternoon, during an ordinary recess, a classmate fell on the playground. There was no warning, just the sharp sound of impact. Then blood. A sudden red against pale concrete. Panic followed immediately. Children froze, then shouted. A whistle blew. Teachers rushed forward, voices overlapping, hands unsure where to go first. Ethan moved without urgency, not because he didn't care, but because something in him already knew what to do. He knelt beside the boy, didn't speak, didn't look around for permission. He placed a single hand over the wound, closed his eyes. The noise around them faded, not because it stopped, but because it no longer mattered. Seconds passed, perhaps fewer. When Ethan lifted his hand, the blood was gone. The skin beneath was unbroken, no cut, no mark, not even a bruise. The playground went silent. Teachers stood frozen, caught between training and disbelief. One dropped the first aid kit without realizing it. Another whispered a name, but no one answered. The boy on the ground blinked, sat up slowly, looked at his arm, then at Ethan. Ethan smiled. Not triumphantly, not mysteriously, just kindly. "We can all do this," he said. His voice was soft, certain. "If we remember." No explanation followed. None was offered. None was asked. That night, Ethan opened his journal. He did not write prophecy. He did not record revelation. There were no instructions, no warnings, only memory, fragments, feelings, moments that felt older than language, not something new being given, but something ancient being returned. And for the first time, the page did not feel like a record of the past, but a mirror. 10 years later, Ethan, now 16, stood at his bedroom window, looking out at the stars above Munich. The city was quiet, not asleep, just resting. Lights glowed softly along the streets. Trams moved like slow thoughts through the dark. Above it all, the sky stretched wide and indifferent, exactly as it always had. And yet, the world beneath it was different. Not louder, not holier, different. Faith was no longer measured by obedience, no longer enforced through fear of consequence or promise of reward. It had become something subtler, something harder to control. Awakening. People spoke less about belief and more about responsibility, less about authority and more about presence. Questions were no longer discouraged. Silence was no longer suspicious. At his desk, Ethan's journal lay open. Its pages were filled, but not crowded. No urgency, no unfinished thoughts. As he looked up at the stars, the final line of Jeshua's manuscript surfaced in his mind, not as text, but as memory. The kingdom of God is not a place you reach. It is a truth you remember. Ethan understood now what had taken the world a decade to begin grasping. Nothing had been given to humanity. Nothing had been unlocked. Only returned. He closed the journal gently, not with ceremony, not with relief, with completion. His task, whatever it had been, was finished. Not because everything was solved, but because nothing more needed to be said. The rest did not belong to prophets, or institutions, or even witnesses. It belonged to humanity. And for the first time in a very long while, that was enough.